once again, if you are just joining us, this is Cloud Computing, Benefits and Barriers for Nonprofits and Libraries. I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. My name is Dawn Krause. I am your facilitator, as I already mentioned. We have three wonderful presenters today. The first is Patrick Callahan. He is Executive Director for NPower Pennsylvania, a nonprofit whose mission is to ensure that all nonprofits use technology effectively to better serve their communities. His background includes over 25 years of operations management and technology leadership, and during his tenure at NPower PA, Patrick has grown the organization by expanding services and adding programs that directly impact the community. And he will shortly introduce us to his organization. Anna Yeager is the Director of Microsoft Programs and Special Projects. She's also the co-founder of the Green Tech Initiative here at TechSoup Global. Green Tech's mission is to help nonprofits and libraries reduce their environmental impact through the effective use of technology, including cloud technologies. Prior to her work on the Cloud Survey, Ms. Yeager led TechSoup Global's IT Applications Department, which implemented and maintained all enterprise software and websites. And last but not least, I'm sorry, Kevin, I profusely apologize for not having your picture here, but Kevin Lowe is Lead Technology Analyst at TechSoup Global, where he is responsible for content development and product evaluation. He's contributed to guides for basic technology for nonprofits such as the Tech Beginner's Guide and the Disaster Planning Toolkit, two very helpful resources on TechSoup.org's website. Since his first Unix Freenet account at his local library, he's been keenly interested in grid and cloud computing. Welcome, presenters. And also in the background assisting with that today is Ariel Gilbert Knight. Thank you. And
Thanks,
before
Dawn.
we get our first presenter, I think, Anna, you're going to go over the goals.
Sure, but why don't we first give Pat a chance to introduce his organization quickly.
Great.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. This is Patrick Callahan. I'm with NPower Pennsylvania. We also operate a brand that you may be familiar with or may have heard through TechSoup called NP Cloud, which just stands for Nonprofit Cloud. And our work with TechSoup and with we're also a nonprofit organization, and our mission is really to help other organizations make the best use of technology to further their missions. So we do that through a lot of different ways, but not the least of which is taking advantage of some of the cloud computing alternatives that are out there today. So thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Hi, everyone. This is Anna, and I wanted to go over the goals of today's webinar. The first thing is I want you to have a general understanding of what organizations around the world have said about the advantages, barriers, and motivators for using cloud computing. We hope that these will also apply to you, and that you can learn some lessons about what your peers are doing and how they apply to you. To get a little more specific, instead of just throwing a bunch of data at you, we do want to familiarize you with the types of applications and the specific applications nonprofits are using. So are they using collaboration and Skype as an example? And then we also want to throw in some tips for integrating cloud solutions into your organization's tech plans. I just want to do a quick check here. I saw in the chat that somebody said that the audio was having an issue. Are folks still having an issue with hearing my voice? If you are, please just let us know in the chat window. Okay, thank you. So I saw. Okay, I'm seeing that you can hear, but it's not a great connection. I'll try to slow down a little bit and see if that helps. Dawn, is there anything we can do to ask Tina for some help on this?
Yes, I'm trying to get her now.
I'm standing by. Can I have you speak for a moment, please?
Sure. I'm happy to speak and let you know. We're planning today. We don't have so much an agenda, bullet points that we want to go through, but we hope to have more of a conversation so that we will show you the data that we received and then talk a little bit more. Pat and Kevin can talk from some real-world experience. Okay. So I'm just going to keep going. I'm seeing that folks are saying it's much better now, so that's great. Oh, and somebody suggested that folks dial in by phone, that maybe it's a little better than the streaming. First we wanted to do a quick poll to get a sense of who's on the phone. So go ahead, if you would, just go ahead and take that poll and let us know.
Looks like the results are coming in, and I'm not sure if you're seeing all that on the right-hand side there, but lots of people answering.
Great. And we saw in your registrations that a lot of folks, there were a number of relative novices to cloud, so we won't be delving into deep technical detail on this, although I am seeing that the majority of folks on the call are identifying as IT decision makers. So that's an interesting mix. Also, we won't, while we'll be mentioning some of the applications that folks told us about in the survey, we won't be making specific recommendations on this call about which ones are right for your organization, but we will talk to you about tech planning. So I just want to set those expectations right up front. All right. So yeah, so it looks like we've got about 46 IT decision makers, and 36 have some responsibility for IT, at 12 who have formal IT, who are formal IT staff, and about 17 who have no formal role. Great. It's always helpful to understand who our audience is. So we'll start here. Pat will give us a quick introduction and definition of types of cloud services.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I think as we get into talking about cloud computing and some of the results that came out of this survey, it's good to do a quick level set about what exactly we're discussing. And generally speaking, when in defining the cloud, it's really any service that is delivered over the Internet. But it really gets packaged into three different services. And probably the one that everyone is most familiar with is software as a service. And these are software packages like Office 365. They could also be Google apps, as well as things like Facebook. So it's generally software that you're using over the Internet without actually downloading anything onto your computer. The other you'll hear sometimes talked about is platform as a service, and this is applicable mostly to developers. So generally speaking, they're using cloud-based software to develop other software or applications without actually having to have a server on site and running their tests on site. So without a large investment in capital, they are able to develop applications in the cloud. And then finally, infrastructure as a service. If you haven't heard of this category, I think you'll start to hear more of this because this starts to replace some of the traditional hardware inside your offices. So things like servers that are probably in a closet, in a back closet, or in a server room somewhere, are now being replaced with infrastructure as a service or hosted servers, or you may even hear them referred to as VMs or virtual machines. As well as another area that's starting to grow is in infrastructure as a service is hosted desktops. So these are your desktop image as you would have it today on your laptop or desktop PC. However, it's really hosted in a computer within a data center and accessed over the Internet again. And some of the advantages of that are not having to replace your machine quite as often, not having to have as powerful a machine. So you may have heard of like thin clients or zero clients, and those typically can access desktop as a service. So basically it's any of the hardware infrastructure that's no longer on site is now hosted in the cloud. But for the purposes of this conversation today, and we'll define that in a minute because I think it's important to see what was used for the survey, we're primarily discussing software as a service.
Yes, indeed we are. Thank you, Pat. For the most part, we were focusing on software as a service in the survey, but we did include some other options, more infrastructure-based options in some of the lists that we chose to offer. Also, the report, that we will just be touching on a few data points from the report, but the full report is available free to anyone online, and there's a link to that at the end of this presentation should you want to go and check it out. We also have translated the executive summary of that report into 19 languages, and those are also available free online for folks who want it. So here on your screen you can see the definition that we used, but it allows you to access software via the Internet instead of from your hard drive or your local computer network. So we were trying to make a very simple definition for everyone around the world, because we did translate this study or this survey into 21 languages and worked with our partner network around the world to do outreach in many of those countries. As you can see here in this slide, we did get responses from people in 88 countries, and we got over 10,593 usable responses. And you can see on the map the areas that are shaded. The ones in blue received over 100 responses per country, and that was our threshold for doing individual country analysis. Below you can see that below the map you can see two pie charts which break out by country on the left, or region actually, United States, Western Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. And you can see that the United States and Western Europe and Canada make up the largest percentage of respondents. In the pie chart on the right, we broke the results down by GDP of that country. So we grouped countries into tiers. The lowest was below $10,000 GDP, and then the highest grouping was above $20,000 GDP. So as you can see, some of the richest countries in the world made up the majority of the responses. In addition to the full report and those executive summaries translated into 19 languages, we also do have 25 country-level reports. So for every country that's in blue, we do have an individual report about what the respondents in that country reported in the survey. So some of those that you can see, obviously the U.S. and Canada, South Africa, Egypt, India, Australia, New Zealand, and a number of countries in Western Europe and Central and Eastern Europe. We also saw in the registrations that you guys were interested in the respondent profile by organization size. We're hoping that you can figure out where in this chart you belong, and I'll mention as we go along the way how some of the results differentiated by organization size. I see that there's a quick question, were there any from South America? Unfortunately, no. That region, as you can see, is not in blue. We did get 127 responses from Mexico, but we were unable to get sufficient responses from any of the other countries in South America. Okay, moving on. So we had to pick one way to define organization by size, and we didn't feel it was appropriate to use budget because of the exchange issues doing currency exchange. So the way we chose to break it down was by number of full-time staff. And we included in that full-time staff or full-time volunteers as well. So if you had a full-time executive director volunteer, they would count as full-time staff. So small was 0 to 9, medium 10 to 44, and large is over 44 or 45 plus. And you can see that the largest percentage of the sample was in the small organization category of 64%. Now let's do poll 2. So we are interested to know a little bit more about you guys and how you utilize the web, or your organization utilizes the web. Do you not use it at all? Do you use it in a light way just to do some email and social media? Or are you a heavy user? You use collaboration tools, CRM, grants management, donor management. See what we've got going here. We'll give you just a moment to fill that out. Great. So it looks like the majority of you guys are light cloud users, but there's a healthy number of you who are not, who consider yourselves non-cloud users. We've got 19 so far, and then about 29 of you who are heavy cloud users. That's an interesting mix. I see some folks saying that they should have checked light instead of non, so maybe a few more in the light category. Great. So now we'll move on to some of the key findings. So as you could see from the poll results, we've got 112 folks and only 20 or fewer than 20 say that they used that they don't use the cloud at all. That corresponds pretty closely with some of our key findings and some findings from other organizations like N10. N10 is another nonprofit technology group, and they also have published a report that is definitely worth looking at if you're not familiar with it. We have a link to that in the resource list that we will be sending out after the webinar via email. So I want to give you a word of caution or a little caveat here. Our results, we do expect, skew towards those organizations who are connected, who are online, and do use some sort of cloud tools already, because they were taking this survey online, so they had to be connected by definition. So do understand that these results represent those organizations who are already connected. Although we did have feedback from some of our partners in India and Egypt, where they had to get some nonprofits into a lab so that they would have a stable internet connection to be able to take the survey. And they said just because they had internet access didn't mean that they had it all day long, that they might just have it for 2 to 4 hours a day. So cloud technologies were harder for them. But as I mentioned, about 74% of the respondents were from the higher GDP countries, and a lot from the U.S. So we also believe that the data skews somewhat towards U.S. and Canadian and Western European organizations. So these are our key findings. 90% of respondents indicated using cloud computing solutions. Although it was interesting because we asked the question in a couple of different ways and found that people did not always respond that they did use cloud computing, but when we asked them about specific applications in further questions, they did say that they used those applications. And these are the folks who don't realize that they're using the cloud, and we're still trying to educate around that issue. 79% said the greatest advantage is easier software and hardware administration, and 60% said lack of knowledge is the greatest barrier to adoption. We were really surprised, or I personally was really surprised that cost was not the greatest barrier to adoption, but lack of knowledge. And that ties back to what I was saying earlier, where people don't realize that they were using cloud technologies when they are. Another interesting point was that 53% reported that they had plans to move a significant portion, and we left the definition of significant portion up to the respondent, that they're planning to move a significant portion of their IT to the cloud within 3 years. And we'll dig into all of these in a little more detail in a moment. But then 47% said that the greatest motivator were reducing cost and ease of setup. We also tried to break down our results into light and heavy usage, and I think Kevin is going to jump in here with that.
Thanks, Anna. I think for those of you who later realize they are probably light users rather than non-users, probably see that they are actually using a lot of cloud services that they're not really aware they are cloud. For example, the Facebooks that you use in the office from your mobile, that exists in the cloud. Anytime that you use a logon that you can use outside your office, essentially it's probably a cloud service. So going back to the point about moving the significant portion of the IT, I think that has to do with when we phrase the question, it probably has to do with things that require significant resources or some resources to get, say, your donor management to the cloud versus something that's already existing in the cloud that you're using. So we think that the demographics in this survey reflects pretty well what we think the general IT trend will be. That is, a lot of IT is going to be in the cloud. That's being adopted by both enterprises and small businesses, and we think that we should provide the NGO sector these resources as well.
Great, thanks so much. I see we had a couple questions in the chat and some hands raised. And I think the point on chat was a good one. If you don't have knowledge to evaluate tech tools, you never get to the discussion of costs being a limiting factor or a barrier. So it's an excellent point to make. Okay, we'll move on, and then I think we'll be taking some of these questions as we go through, but also we have some time scheduled at the end to address some of these questions. So here were some of the apps that respondents were familiar with. Obviously the Facebooks, Gmail, Skype, Twitter, a lot of folks were very familiar with. But even down to Office Live, Salesforce, and CRM, there were still over a third of the people were aware or familiar with these tools. However, when we looked at actual usage, we saw that it lags behind the familiarity, which makes sense. But still, you can see up in on the left-hand side here, I'm trying to get my pointer, that still 70% say Facebook, 63% say Gmail, and 50% are using Skype in their organizations. And one point of clarification, somebody asked, it sounds as if you use the Internet, you're using the cloud. Yes and no. We did not include normal Internet browsing and searching and some of those and reading content as choices in the survey. So we were really focusing on applications that you interact with, like Skype or email, or Office productivity tools like Office 365 or Google Docs. So we were trying to have a pretty broad definition, but not so broad that it would include everybody who has a computer and an Internet connection, or a phone with an Internet connection. As Kevin said, it's a good rule of thumb. I think if you're able to log into it outside of your office, it's a pretty good bet that it's cloud technology. So now we're getting into some of the actual results. 79% said that administration categories or answers were the greatest advantages. So some of those answers were easier software access, easier disaster recovery, reduced system administration, and rapid deployment. If you're interested in the breakdown of some of these categories, we did publish most of this data in the appendix of our full report, so you can see exactly how many people answered as something as a major or a minor advantage, and how those break down for each of these bullet points below. Also, 62% did indicate that cost was a barrier, or it was an advantage. But as we'll see later, they also reported cost as a barrier. So one of the things that we learned from this study is that and that we knew was that this issue is complex, and there's a lot of confusion out there. Obviously, cost and security are two of those where we saw a lot of opposing views or answers that seem to be in conflict. So Pat, I'm wondering if you want to jump in here with an example of some of the advantages you see in your work with nonprofits.
Yes, thanks, Anna. This is interesting data to me, and none of it, frankly, surprises me too much. For one, when I look at administration, I see 79% cited administration as one of the reasons to use cloud-based solutions. I completely agree, and it's one of the things we talk to about our clients about. Managing, owning, maintaining, replacing a server is very costly, and most of us don't do it very well. We don't keep them up to date, or if we do keep them up to date, we may be paying someone to keep them up to date. So very expensive to own and maintain. So I think that's one of the huge upsides to cloud computing, is that you can actually reduce some of your hardware costs and make your administration much easier. So the administration and cost somewhat go hand in hand. I will say, looking at cost, and 62% say that's favorable, and then you'll see a slide later where there's a significant portion that don't feel that cost is a factor for the positive. It is interesting to me too, because what we see is a lot depends on size, right? Most of the nonprofits we work with are, generally speaking, tend to maybe 50 upwards, sometimes of a couple hundred users. And there is definitely a price point where it makes sense to be on the cloud and where it may not make sense to be on the cloud, depending on the application you're talking about. So, for instance, if you have 100 users and they all need to be on Salesforce.com, well, Salesforce will donate 10 licenses to nonprofits, so that's great, but you're going to pay for the other 90 licenses that you need. So it could be quite costly for your organization. But on the other hand, if you're a smaller organization and 10 people being inside your database at any given time is more than enough, then it's a very attractive from a cost standpoint. So I think one of the messages there is you really need to look at what kind of cloud applications you're considering for your organization and where the cost-benefit line is drawn based on the size of your organization and what you're trying to do with that software.
Thanks, Pat. That's some great tips. And I wish we had something where we could say, here, fill out this spreadsheet, and that will tell you whether this is going to be cost prohibitive or not for you, or if it's a wise investment for your organization. But unfortunately, it really depends on the size and skill level in your organization and the particular solution you are looking at, or solutions that you're looking at. Okay, so moving on. Also, I saw a question in chat about asking why PayPal was so low in usage. We have steered clear of speculating about the cause of these answers or why people answered this way. We're trying to just put the data out there and let others speculate on it. It could be that PayPal is not used in the organization, but that people use it on their own. And we did try to differentiate in the survey about the difference between what is used in an organization and what people use personally. So that could be one of the reasons why PayPal didn't receive a higher percentage of responses. So now we're getting into some of the barriers, things that made it difficult for folks to adopt cloud technologies. And we saw that 60% indicated that lack of knowledge was the greatest barrier. And 30% of respondents said that they didn't even know enough to know what the barriers are. So that definitely goes back to what somebody asked earlier or stated earlier, where if you don't know enough, you can't even get to costs as an issue because you're not sure. One of the ways that TechSoup Global and our associated network will be responding to this bit of data is we will be producing a content stream throughout the year trying to address some of the issues around lack of knowledge to help people make better choices for their organization. It mostly focused around the cloud, but also how do you integrate that into your general tech planning. And Kevin actually will be writing, I think Kevin and Ariel will be writing a lot of that content, so we've got two of our greatest experts here. But also cost is definitely a factor, and that's another thing that we are trying to address here is partnering. As many of you know, we partner with corporations in the world to get their products donated to or discounted to nonprofits and libraries. And we are continuing to pursue more donor partners and hope to leverage some of this data to say, hey, your products are needed out there by these nonprofits, but cost is a major barrier, so help us with that. And so we're hoping to get more donated and discounted products into the network and into the catalog. Okay. Yes, there's a question in the chat about will we be providing links to the individual country survey results. And we do have a list already up online where you find our published survey about where links to our partners' surveys. And each of our partners has published their individual country reports. And if there's something that you can't find there, please feel free to reach out to me directly, and I can help get you the results that you're looking for. Okay, moving on. Sorry, just flipping here. So now we're looking at motivators. We asked folks not just what would be a barrier, but what would motivate them to move to the cloud. What would help? And here are the results that we found. Cost now was one of the greatest motivators that we did see reported in the results, along with ease of setup, which goes back to the administration advantage that folks were reporting earlier in the survey. And training here shows up at 37%, which is interesting because remember one of the greatest barriers was lack of knowledge. So if 60% were reporting lack of knowledge was an issue, but only 37%. Whoops, I'm messing up my slides here. But only 37% were showing that it was a motivator. That's an interesting conundrum for us. How do we address our content and our offerings to best help motivate and get folks trained and overcome that lack of knowledge? Pat, do you want to jump in here with some of your real-world experiences?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Anna. So when I look at that training number, I see another viewpoint from that, and that's that one of the reasons folks are considering adopting cloud technologies is the ability to train people and do remote consulting. And I think this is especially important concept because one of the things that cloud really does is allow for a great deal of mobility. So because you're not physically tied to your office anymore, accessing your information on remotely is much easier if it's stored in the cloud. And I think I saw one of the questions earlier about if the internet connection goes down, then the cloud goes down, and I'm out of luck, right? Well, yes, that is true. Now, I would turn that around and say if your server goes down in your office, you're completely out of luck until you get that server up and running, which could take, I've seen it, hours, days. I've seen it, take up to a week to get a new machine in there, get it, everything migrated and loaded, and get folks back to work. Whereas if your internet connection goes down, you can, just leave the building and go somewhere else, frankly, a Starbucks, and be right back on onto your cloud applications like email and documents and so forth. So there are advantages and disadvantages on both sides. Certainly, again, cost is a factor, and there's good cost advantages and bad cost advantages. Just depends on size and the applications you're looking at and how expensive they are. Because the one thing that's different is it's shifting a lot of your investment dollars from capital expenses to operational expenses. So it's something you want to keep in mind. And you are paying a subscription fee generally for cloud-based software, so it's going to be an ongoing fee. But it certainly reduces your physical footprint, the need to buy servers, the need to replace those servers frequently, and to maintain those servers. I see ease of setup as being a motivator as well, and I think that's a terrific one. One of the characteristics of being cloud computing is that it's on demand, right? So that today I can go out onto the internet and purchase a piece of software and be using it literally within minutes, whereas if it were client-server-based software, I would have to get my server administrator to load the software onto the server and give permissions to me and move data on there and so forth, and that can take days if not weeks. So from an ease of setup standpoint, it's much faster generally to deploy cloud technologies and much easier to use. So I'll leave it at that.
This is Kevin. Thanks, Pat, for your explanations and experiences. I do want to jump in and say that for many nonprofits who may not have a server client system, it's kind of a moot point on the cost savings of administering a server because, for instance, you might have 5 on-site staff, a few volunteers who comes in now and then who may work from home sometimes. You may not even have a server to manage. You may just be working on some grant reports. They can be shared online. You may be having some budgets to your board members who are probably not there at all. So I think it also depends on how your nonprofit is ran. If you don't have that existing infrastructure, you may be already moving to the cloud and not noticing it. So it depends really on how you plan to run your office and how that IT supplements those business processes. So the 20% on not planning to use cloud services, they may already be using cloud services. They're just not necessarily migrating existing databases, or the databases just from the get-go are in the cloud, which I think increasingly the newer nonprofits, they start with Salesforce, or they start with something in the cloud like Donor Perfect online, for example. Then you don't really have that migration to go through. You don't have an infrastructure to migrate.
Thanks, guys. That's some great conversation. And again, that just illustrates some of the complexities. And we know it's not a straightforward, do I go to the cloud or don't I? Or do I adopt this technology or don't I? There are lots of factors that you should be factoring in. And each of these categories are things that you should factor in. Cost. What is the cost going to look like for you? And what does your existing solution look like? If you don't have a server, but you've got volunteers out there, and you need to communicate with them in the field more effectively, well, maybe cost is less of a factor because your need is so great. Ease of setup, and do you have IT resources and technical folks who can do in-house applications, or is something like a CRM so complex that you need to engage a consultant to help you? Training, and I saw somebody ask a question about security, and that goes to some of the trust. And do you trust the vendor who you'll be working with? And this actually segues into another question that someone had. What's the likelihood that the cloud will go down? Pat, I also welcome you jumping in here, but my take on it is everyone goes down. right? Everyone gets hit by hackers. But again, if you don't have the technical resources to support your infrastructure and you don't have redundant backup of your servers elsewhere, the likelihood that you could have a catastrophic failure is greater on an in-house server if you don't have the right support system for that. It's more likely that your internet connection, I think, might go down. And as Pat said before, then you can go home or go to your Starbucks or another cafe and potentially get to some of your mission critical data and applications.
Yeah, I'll just tag on to that a little bit there, Anna. And I think it's really important that we remember and understand that the cloud isn't one thing. It's a lot of different things. And when folks are referring to cloud technologies, they're still being hosted somewhere. So as Anna said, if they're not in your office, they're in someone's data center. And it's not a single data center. There's many data centers. So if you look at Amazon or Salesforce or Microsoft, take Microsoft for instance, they have, I believe, somewhere between 7 and 9 data centers worldwide now. So yes, some of those can go offline, and they will from time to time. What's important is that they have some sort of redundant systems built in. So in the case of Microsoft, they store your data in 2 different locations, and those 2 locations are at least 1,000 miles apart from one another. So their whole system is designed to withstand some disasters and avert disaster by having redundancy built in. And that's important because you want to know who's hosting your data and where it's being hosted. Because there are some folks that will say, well, you can back up your data with us in our cloud, and you've come to realize, well, that's a single place. It's only being backed up in one place. And if that place goes offline or if there's some sort of disaster, your data is now gone. So there are various tier levels of data centers, and in each tier comes more redundancy and more fail-safe methodology that's in place to protect your data. And so some of the big players like Microsoft and Salesforce and Amazon are using the very highest level technologies. Smaller providers may not be. So you always want to do your homework and know where your data is being stored and know who's watching it. And I know Kevin's going to talk a little bit more about security, and those are important concepts to understand as well when you're picking your cloud providers.
Thanks, Pat. Moving on to time frames. As you can see here underneath the image of the clock, we actually have a breakdown by region and how many respondents in those regions said that they were going to be moving how quickly. But what we did see is 53% plan to move a significant portion of their IT to the cloud within 3 years. A good TechSoup friend, Alan Gunn of Aspiration, has put it succinctly: the cloud is not a fad. It's not going away. We see providers and our donor partners who we work with moving more and more of their software to the cloud. So what we are doing as part of our mission is trying to help nonprofits and libraries be prepared for that. We don't want to see nonprofits and libraries left behind because they don't have enough knowledge or enough resources, whether that's people skills or dollars, to make this move. So we're trying to help guide you and get you where you need to be in a safe and way that works with your organization. However, 36% said they have no plans to move to the cloud, which was interesting. No plans at all, not within the next 3 years, because one of our categories was more than 3 years. 36% said they have no plans to move to the cloud. So that was an interesting bit. And then medium-sized organizations, those with 10 to 44 full-time staff, reported that they had the most aggressive time frame, with 22% reporting that they plan to move to the cloud within 1 year. So we saw a lot of medium-sized organizations saying that's where they're going. Again, why is that? I could speculate, but we didn't get to the whys in the survey. Sorry, before we move on, Pat or Kevin, does either of you want to jump in on time frame and this slide? Okay, moving on.
No, I don't think so. Thank you. Sorry, Anna.
Okay, so what are some of the application types that NGOs are most likely to adopt? You can see up here file storage and sharing was the #1 app that folks were likely to adopt. Again, maybe folks have already, maybe some of these organizations have already adopted some other ones. But this goes with some of the data we presented earlier where we saw that email and file sharing and social media were ones that were already adopted. So you can see file sharing and email were two of the greatest app types that folks are moving to the cloud. I saw a question earlier that ties into this, and that was, do I put my donor management data in the cloud? Donor management and grants data is very sensitive stuff, right? It's secure. It needs to be secure. It's mission critical. One thing that N10 pointed out in their survey or in their report was that folks said, "Oh no, I'm not putting this mission critical, highly secure data in the cloud," but they had their email in the cloud. And we bet that a lot that they talk in their email about their donors, talk with their donors, proposals go back and forth via email. So be mindful that even if you're not putting your CRM or your donor management or grant management specifically into the cloud in an app, you might be putting it there inadvertently by using file storage in the cloud or email in the cloud. And you need to be mindful of how you do that and how secure those are. And really, some of it is about procedures in your office, not even the technology, but what do you allow people to send via email or put in file storage, and how secure are your backups? So these are things to keep in mind as you go through. And as you can see on the right, the larger organizations reported that they were likely to move to more CRM, more complex apps. And the small and medium-sized organizations, their answers weren't different from these percentages that you see here represented in this chart. Kevin, you want to jump in here?
I also want to follow up on that point about the proposals. As many of you know, many funders actually are also thinking about the same questions. And in our survey, we also found that there is ambivalence in that area where funders are wondering to what extent their migration to the cloud would affect the sector. I think many of us are applying to grants online now, and that's been going on for years, even before this quote-unquote cloud phenomenon became more ubiquitous. So I think this is a sector-wide change that we have to be aware of. To the point about file sharing, yes, as we become more mobile, that will become more apparent as well. Recently, here in San Francisco, Box.net, which is a big provider of file storage services, had a conference, and the founder and some of its funders were mentioning that they are doing this is the trend. A lot of sort of college industries popping out from this online file storage. So it is happening. And what was interesting to me was when a VC was saying that he used the cloud all the time. Now, these are the guys that actually fund these companies, and they feel confident about storing files on the internet and in this cloud. So I think there's a vote of confidence. But we don't know, for example, which files they actually are willing to actually put in this storage. They may have some critical files that they store on-site, encrypted somewhere, which is likely to be the case. So it's not an either-or proposition. It's not like you move everything to the cloud and nothing remains. And we'll point out the fact that you probably do need to back up some of those things, the data in the cloud, into your own servers as a way to access them when it can't access the cloud services.
Yeah, I'll add on here. So when we're talking about security, because security always comes up, it's always an issue. Is my data in the cloud secure? And I kind of go back to the point of know who your vendor is, and know where your data is being stored. A number of the larger providers are going to go through various compliances, whether it's HIPAA compliance or go through SAS 70 audits that basically look at their processes and their procedures and how data is handled in their facilities to assure some safety and some security. There is no absolute safe and secure anywhere, including in your office. My guess is most of your organizations, at least a lot of the organizations I work with, are have a firewall, and it's the same firewall that's being sold over and over again. And believe me, hackers, if they want to get in there, they generally can get in there pretty quickly if they're any good. Now, that's not to say Microsoft Cloud isn't going to get hacked. It absolutely is going to get hacked from time to time, and there's people trying to get in there all day long. The difference is, Microsoft has hundreds of people, probably if not thousands, that monitor those servers all day long and monitor those securities and try and patch those back doors, if any, that are open to try and prevent any security breaches. That's generally not something we have in our office. So I don't want to paint the picture that it's not risky to have your data in the cloud. It's risky to have your data anywhere, and we should always just take as many security precautions as possible, and most importantly, know who your vendor is and know where your data is being stored.
Great, thanks, Pat. And we're going to jump to some questions here. I see one about what's the benefit of a public library using cloud technology. Just quickly, I want to touch on, we have another cloud webinar that we did a year or so ago that we'll send out the link to after this. But the public library really depends on which computers you're talking about. If you're talking about your public access computers, actually cloud technologies have a lot to offer, because then your users aren't trying to store their data on your public access computers. And they can come in, go to any computer, or go to a different library if they're using cloud technologies, and their data is in the cloud. So they can get their Google Doc or their Office, their Excel doc from anywhere. So we think that there are a lot of benefits to cloud technologies for public access computing. It also helps you keep your terminals, your machines cleaner and more secure, so if people aren't storing things on those desktops. So let's move quickly to Kevin and some of his cloud tech planning tips and security.
Thanks, Anna. I'm going to run through these fairly quickly because I think we touched on them a little bit earlier. And next slide is on security, and I know a lot of folks are interested in that. So the key points I want to make is that cloud doesn't change everything. It's the migration of technology, technology trends that we've seen over the years and how nonprofits have responded. I think even before the term cloud, I think many of you may be familiar with the term ASPs, or application service providers, which is to extent similar and the same thing. Your IT is not necessarily doesn't respond to the type of IT that's out there, but rather how you run your organization. Do you have a lot of off-site staff, or do you have mostly people coming in? Do you have a lot of confidential data that's still paper-based that you need to keep paper-based in your office? So it's important to think about those aspects rather than the cloud is happening, do I need to change it? I think the point about cost, we mentioned Salesforce. Salesforce is a great example of them giving you 10 free licenses in the United States here. But the actual migration cost could be very costly for those with existing databases. I've seen a lot of positive and negative experiences of just having that transition period hamper their normal operations, and how some data may not fully migrate well, and there are other things you need to do. There are supplementary costs. So be prepared to migrate if it's something as important as your database. There are some orgs that can use cloud better than others, and the point about the CapEx, capital expenses, and operating expenses. If you are mostly grant funded, you get a chunk of grant monies in the beginning that you can use some of it for IT. You may not have the luxury of being able to pay for subscription services. And those subscription services prices may change. So you may want to figure out, am I going to be paying more in the future for extra storage, for example? Do I need to upgrade sooner than I would think? If you control your own IT expenses, then you can actually figure that out and build that into your tech plans. The point about staff training, I think for those who use a lot of interns and volunteers coming out of college, for example, they are actually using the cloud very, very much so. So if you intend to use a lot of those kind of staff, it may be easier for them to use an Office 365. They may be able to work from home, and versus if you're using staff that have been in the industry for a long time, they know their Office back and forth. They know all the keyboard shortcuts. They know how to do their pivot tables by shortcuts. Then it may be harder for them to transition into something in the cloud. And bear in mind that using, now we talk about Office, there may be a difference in features and functionality that you should be aware of. If those features are important to you, then you have to know what you're missing out in the cloud. And the security in the cloud, I know we're running short on time, but I do want to point out that instead of asking the question, is the cloud secure, it's better to ask, are you secure? Is your staff prepared, security-minded? Do they leave their stations logged on when they work in a cafe? Do they lose their mobile devices? Do they leave their passwords on Post-its on their office? If your staff aren't security-minded, then they will remain to be not security-minded when they work in the cloud. So they might leave their Google login available. They might lose their computer with your important data. Even if it's in cloud, you can access it. The analogy I like to give is it safer to travel by air or by car? Well, you get high-profile incidents in the air, such as 9/11, of course. But if you travel by car, you actually run into a lot of accidents. You may have a greater risk of accidents. So they're not necessarily. So if we talk about cloud, you have high-profile hacks that happen to LinkedIn where they lost unencrypted passwords. You have Google being down. Those are high-profile, but the probability of that happening to you is much slimmer than you actually tripping on your power cord for your server. So it's better to think of it that way, less so than cloud is secure, not secure. And we allude to Gunnar's presentation that is on SlideShare that we will give you a link to. Security is a process, not a state, right? So that doesn't, regardless of whether you're on a cloud or on-premise, you have to be redundant. You have to keep your data, periodically get your data from the cloud, store it somewhere so you can use it in case you need to access it. Know about which mission-critical data you are willing to put out there, the confidence in which your vendor encrypts their data have failover. And yes, be prepared for data loss as you would in a traditional on-premise environment. And a little point on the HIPAA that a lot of folks on chat mentioned. Yes, a Google or a vendor that's specific to health services will ensure that it's HIPAA compliant. It's more likely that they're HIPAA compliant than you are to store your data on the cloud. I think the compliance landscape is still evolving in the sense that what about the rules of data residency? For example, some countries may, if a country periodically for migration reasons move their data to a country that has less data restrictions, are you not in compliance? Now, those are more complex questions that enterprises are trying to answer. But for our purposes, I think I would say on the aggregate, the cloud is probably more secure than your own if you don't have that security mindset.
Thank you, Kevin. This is Dawn. Unfortunately, we ran out of time, and so we're going to have to wrap up today. I'd like to thank Kevin, Anna, and Patrick for their great content contributions and the audience for being very interactive. I know that we're going to have quite a few things that we're going to want to take over to our community forum to answer there. And don't forget, you will get the email in 1 to 2 days with all of the resources, and some of the things that were shared in chat will also be shared with you via that email. So I just want to thank everybody, thank our behind-the-scenes folks also for helping us out today, as well as thank ReadyTalk, our wonderful sponsor for the webinar platform. I'm going to stop the meeting, and there should be a pop-up survey. We would really appreciate it if you would fill that out. It's very short. It does help us shape our webinars in the future, and it sounds like some people in this particular webinar had some good ideas for future cloud webinars that we would really like to hear from you. Also, you will get that survey link in the follow-up email. If you can't do it right now, we would appreciate it at any point that you can give us the feedback. So thank you all, and we're signing off. Have a great day.